Hi, boys and girls. We have our story moon on, and it is time for a bedtime story. And tonight I'm going to read you the story of the Library Lion. And the reason I chose this one is because when I read it at school, several of you said, "Oh, I like that story." And it's just such a special story. It's a little long, so get cozy. And here's the cover of it. The Library Lion. And it's authored by Michelle Knudsen, and it's illustrated. The pictures are done by Kevin Hawkes. It's such a big book, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the words, and then I'll hold up the pictures for you to look at. Now, we've read it before, so some of you might have a good memory of what the pictures were like. But if you don't, try to imagine in your mind, if you were illustrating this book, what would you draw for what I'm reading? And then see how close you are when I show you the picture. See how close you are, okay? All right, The Library Lion. The Library Lion, authored by Michelle Knudsen, illustrated by Kevin Hawkes. So that's the cover page. Look at Bookworm. Bookworm's listening to the story, and our moon's on. We're just so cozy over here. One day, a lion came into the library. He walked right past the circulation desk and up into the stacks of books. He just walked in like he lived there. So they are at the stacks. And remember, that's Mr. McBee. And then there's the lion. Mr. McBee ran down the hall to the head librarian's office. "Miss Merriweather," he called. "No running," said Miss Merriweather without looking up. "But there's a lion," said Mr. McBee, "in the library." "Is he breaking any rules?" asked Miss Merriweather. She was very particular about rule breaking. "Well, no," said Mr. McBee, "not really." "Then leave him be." Okay, so he's running down the hall to tell her he saw a real lion in the library, and she's just sitting there as if lions come into the library every day, and it's fine as long as they're not breaking rules. So silly. The lion wandered around the library. He sniffed the card catalog. He rubbed his head against the new book collection. Then he padded over to the story corner and went to sleep. No one was sure what to do. There weren't any rules about lions in the library. So there he is. And then there he's asleep, waiting for story time. Soon it was time for story hour. There weren't any rules about lions at story hour either. The story lady seemed a little bit nervous to have a lion in the group, but she read out the first book's title in a good, clear voice. The lion looked up. The story lady kept reading. The lion stayed for the next story and the story after that. He wanted another story, but the children began to walk away. "Story hour is over," a little girl told him. "It's time to go home, Lion." The lion looked at the children. He looked at the story lady. He looked at the closed books. And then he roared very loudly. So there he is, loving the stories. He's being so good. But then he's so sad and a little bit angry when the story's over, so he roars. "Read me another story!" Miss Merriweather came running out of her office. "Who is making that noise?" she demanded. "It's the lion," said Mr. McBee. Miss Merriweather marched over to the lion. "If you cannot be quiet, you will have to leave," she said in a very stern voice. Those are the rules." The lion kept roaring. He sounded so sad. The little girl tugged on Miss Merriweather's dress. "If the lion promises to be quiet, can he come back for story hour tomorrow?" she asked. The lion stopped roaring. He looked at Miss Merriweather. Miss Merriweather looked back, and then she said, "Yes. A nice, quiet lion would certainly be allowed to come back for story hour tomorrow." "Hooray!" said the children. The next day, the lion came back. "You are early," said Miss Merriweather. "Story hour is not until 3 o'clock." The lion did not budge. That means he didn't move. "Very well," said Miss Merriweather. "You might as well make yourself useful." She sent him off to dust the encyclopedias until it was time for story hour. The next day the lion came early again. This time Miss Merriweather asked him to lick all of the envelopes on the overdue notices that she was mailing. That looks fun. Soon the lion began doing all kinds of things around the library without even being asked. He was so helpful. He dusted the encyclopedias. He licked the envelopes. He let small children stand on his back to reach books on the highest shelves. Then he curled up in the story corner to wait for story hour to begin. He did this every day. At first, the people in the library were nervous about the lion, but soon they got used to having him around. In fact, he seemed very well suited for the library. He fit right in. His big feet were quiet as they padded along the library floor. He made a comfy backrest for the children at story hour, and he never roared in the library anymore. He knew not to break that rule. "What a helpful lion," people said. They patted his soft head as he walked by. "How did we ever get along in the library without a lion?" they said. But Mr. McBee scowled when he heard people say that. They had always gotten along just fine before without a lion. "We did not need lions," said Mr. McBee. Lions, he thought. Ugh! Lions cannot understand the rules. And they did not belong in the library. One day, after the lion had dusted all of the encyclopedias and licked all of the envelopes and helped all the small children, the lion padded down the hall to Miss Merriweather's office to see what he could do there. There was still some time left before story hour. "Hello, lion," said Miss Merriweather. "I know something you can do. You can bring a book back into the stacks for me. Let me just reach way up here on this high shelf and get it down." Miss Merriweather stepped up onto a footstool. The book was just out of her reach. Miss Merriweather stood on her tiptoes. She stretched out her fingers. "Almost there," she said. Then Miss Merriweather stretched a little too far. And we know what's going to happen. "Ouch!" said Miss Merriweather softly as she fell to the ground, and she did not get up. "Mr. McBee!" she called after about a minute. "Mr. McBee!" But Mr. McBee was down at the circulation desk. He could not hear her calling. "Lion," said Miss Merriweather, "please go and get Mr. McBee." The lion ran down the hall as fast as he could run. "No running," Miss Merriweather called after him. She still loved her rules. This time, the lion put his big front paws up on top of the circulation desk and just looked at Mr. McBee. "Go away, Lion," said Mr. McBee. "I'm busy." Then Lion began to whine. He pointed his nose down the hall toward Miss Merriweather's office where she'd fallen, but Mr. McBee just ignored him. Finally, the lion did not know what to do. The lion finally did the only thing he could think to do. He looked Mr. McBee right in the eyes. Then he opened his mouth very widely, and he roared the loudest roar he'd ever roared in his entire life. Roar! Mr. McBee gasped. "You're not being quiet," he said to the lion. "You're breaking the rules." So Mr. McBee jumped up and began to walk down the hall as fast as he could go to tell on the lion, to tell Miss Merriweather that the lion was roaring. The lion did not follow him. He had broken the rules. He knew what he'd done, and he knew it was wrong. He hung his head and walked toward the doors. He knew what it meant. He had to leave the library. Mr. McBee did not even notice. "Miss Merriweather!" he called out. "Miss Merriweather!" as he walked very, very fast. "The lion broke the rules! The lion broke the rules!" But we know he had a really good reason for breaking the rules, right? He burst into Miss Merriweather's office. She was not in her chair. "Miss Merriweather!" he asked. "Miss Merriweather?" he asked again. "Sometimes," said Miss Merriweather from the floor behind her desk, "there is a good reason to break the rules, even in the library. Now please go call a doctor. I think I've broken my arm." Mr. McBee ran down the hall to call a doctor. "No running," Miss Merriweather called after him. I think that was a good reason to run, but she still loved her rules of no running. The next day, things were back to normal. Almost. Miss Merriweather's left arm was in a cast. The doctors had told her not to work too hard. "I will have my lion to help me," Miss Merriweather thought. But the lion did not come to the library that morning. At 3 o'clock, Miss Merriweather walked over to the story corner. The story lady was just beginning a story for the children. But the lion was not there. Do you remember why the lion's not there? People in the library kept looking for the lion. They kept looking up from their books and computer screens, hoping they would see his familiar furry face. But the lion did not come that day. The lion did not come the next day, or the next day, or the day after that. One evening, Mr. McBee stopped by Miss Merriweather's office on his way out. "Can I do anything for you before I go, Miss Merriweather?" he asked her. "No, thank you," Miss Merriweather sighed. She was looking out the window. Her voice was very quiet, even for the library. Mr. McBee frowned as he walked away. He thought there probably was something he could do for Miss Merriweather after all. She's so sad because she's missing her library lion, and she doesn't realize why he left. Mr. McBee left the library, but he did not go home. He walked around the neighborhood. He looked under cars. He looked behind bushes. He looked in backyards and trash cans and tree houses. Do you think he's looking for the lion? Finally, he circled all the way back around to the library. The lion was sitting outside the library, looking in through the glass doors. "Hello, lion," said Mr. McBee. The lion did not turn around. "I thought you might like to know," said Mr. McBee, "that there's a new rule at the library. No roaring aloud unless you have a very good reason. Say if you're trying to help a friend who's been hurt, for example." The lion's ears twitched. He turned around, but Mr. McBee was already walking away. The next day, Mr. McBee walked down the hall to Miss Merriweather's office. "What is it, Mr. McBee?" asked Miss Merriweather in her new, sad, quiet voice. Oh, I didn't read that sad. Let me do it again. The next day, Mr. McBee walked down the hall to Miss Merriweather's office. "What is it, Mr. McBee?" asked Miss Merriweather in her new, sad, quiet voice. "I thought you might like to know," said Mr. McBee, "that there's a lion in the library." Miss Merriweather jumped up from her chair and ran down the hall. Mr. McBee smiled. "No running," he called after her. Miss Merriweather didn't listen. Sometimes there was a good reason to break the rules, even in the library. Isn't that cute? And then there's the drawing of the front of the library again. I think that's one of our favorite picture books as a class because it's really fun to think of a library and a lion in a library, because you don't think of a lion being in a library. And it's fun to imagine what that might really be like if there was a nice, sweet lion in the library. And then I think it's fun to see how the characters change, because the lion, he came into the stories kind of grumpy, and I'm going to growl and get my way. I'll growl to get more stories. And he learned it was better to be helpful and kind, and then he could stay in the library. And then Miss Merriweather changed because she didn't really care that much about the lion in the beginning. She just wanted to be sure that he followed the rules. But then they became friends. And then even Grumpy Mr. McBee changed too and realized he liked the lion. So I think that's one of our favorite stories for that reason, for those reasons. So as you're falling asleep, you can think of other reasons you like this story. Good night.